It was raining that evening, a slow, steady rain that made the house feel even quieter than usual. I was in the kitchen, making tea, when I heard it. 3 deliberate knocks. For a moment, I thought it might be the delivery man from the pharmacy. But something about the rhythm, it wasn't casual. It was heavy. Measured. Almost intentional. I walked to the door, pulling my cardigan tighter around me. When I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Standing there was Evan. My son. The same son I hadn't spoken to in over 10 years. The same son who, without asking, had sold the last pieces of his mother's jewelry, her bracelets, necklaces, her wedding ring, for $500. It had been the final straw back then. Not just the act, but the coldness with which he did it. That betrayal had carved something out of me, something that never quite grew back. And now, here he was. He looked older than 34 should look. His once carefree face was drawn and tired, like someone who'd spent years chasing something they could never catch. His hair was longer, unkempt, and there was a stiffness in the way he stood, as if pride was the only thing holding him upright. "Dad," he said finally, his voice trying for warmth but landing somewhere between forced cheer and guilt. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at him, and in those few seconds, a flood of memories came back, the arguments, the slammed doors, the day I realized my own son could look me in the eye and take something irreplaceable without a shred of remorse. "You're surprised to see me," he added, with a half-smile. "That's one word for it," I said. My voice was calm, but my heart was pounding. He shifted awkwardly on the porch, glancing past me into the hallway, like he was already measuring the distance to the living room. His eyes paused on the glass cabinet in the corner, the one I knew he could see from where he stood. That cabinet hid the safe. I stepped aside reluctantly. "Come in. You're getting wet." He entered, dripping rainwater onto the rug his mother used to love. I watched him look around the house, his eyes lingering on certain corners like he was taking inventory. The photographs, the shelves, and yes, that cabinet. "Place hasn't changed much," he said. "I like it that way," I replied. We walked into the living room. I sat in my chair, he sat on the couch across from me. There was a silence between us that was heavier than the rain outside. He was smiling, but it wasn't the smile of someone happy to see you. It was the smile of someone who needs something. "So," I began, "after all this time, why now?" His eyes flickered, just for a second, to the cabinet again. It was so quick most people wouldn't have caught it. But I wasn't most people. I'd been a father too long not to notice when my child's mind was elsewhere. "I wanted to reconnect," he said finally. "It's been too long. We've both said things we didn't mean." I said nothing. I let the words hang in the air, knowing he would keep talking if I didn't fill the silence. "And, he continued, "I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately. You know, her things. The stuff that's left." There it was. I felt my stomach tighten. The image of Margaret came into my mind, her laugh, the way she used to tilt her head when she was amused, the way she'd hold my arm when we walked. The jewelry she wore wasn't just decoration, each piece had a story. A trip to Italy. A birthday surprise. The day we brought Evan home from the hospital. And 10 years ago, Evan had taken all of it and traded it for 5 crumpled $100 bills. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my face neutral. "Her things are still here," I said carefully. "I know," he replied quickly. Too quickly. That's why I came. I just feel like she'd want me to have something. You know, to remember her by." The words were wrapped in sentiment, but underneath I could hear the metallic scrape of greed. I studied him for a long moment. "We'll talk about it," I said. His smile widened, and in that moment, I knew. Evan hadn't come here to make peace. He hadn't come here because he missed me, or because he regretted what he'd done. He came for the jewelry. The same jewelry I had spent years, tracking down, restoring, and turning into something extraordinary. And if I was right, he would do whatever it took to get it. The rain outside picked up, tapping harder against the windows. Evan leaned back into the couch, comfortable now, thinking he had opened the first door. But in my mind, I had already locked it. I asked if he'd eaten. He said no, but the way he answered told me he wasn't hungry for food. Still, I went to the kitchen and put water on for pasta, set a pan on low, and took out the jar of sauce Margaret used to make in batches and freeze. I left the door between the kitchen and the living room open. I could hear him moving, the soft creak of the couch, the brief pause by the hallway where the glass cabinet sat like a lighthouse in a storm. "Smells familiar," he called out after a minute. "Mom's recipe?" I stirred the sauce, tasting for salt. "As close as I can get." He came to the doorway, leaning on the frame as if it had always been his house to lean on. "She used to hum when she cooked," he said. "That little tune from the Italian movie." I looked up. For a second, I saw the boy he'd once been, legs too long for his body, hair sticking up in 10 directions, asking if he could lick the spoon. Then the memory shifted, and I saw the man who sold the last spoon Margaret ever used because it had an old silver handle. "Do you remember the song?" I asked. He smiled, but there was no melody in it. Only that it sounded happy. I set 2 plates, 2 forks, 1 old linen napkin folded in half so it could be shared. I poured water into glasses. He watched me carefully, as if measuring how much of my life still had room for him. We sat. The rain softened. He twirled pasta without eating, pushing noodles around like he was organizing a plan. "You've kept everything neat," he said. "Neat is easy when there are fewer people to make a mess." He gave a small, apologetic laugh that didn't touch his eyes. "I've thought about coming sooner." "Why didn't you?" "Work. Life. Pride." He looked up. "Mistakes." I let the word sit there between us. He waited for me to rescue it, to throw him a rope of absolution. I didn't. He tried again. "I know I can't undo what happened. I was young." "You were 24, I said. "Young enough to be foolish. Old enough to know you were taking what wasn't yours." He glanced down, fork pausing midair. "I told myself you didn't value jewelry. That it hurt you to see it." "It did hurt," I said. "That's why I kept it. Some things are supposed to hurt." Silence again. The clock ticked. He twirled the pasta and finally took a bite, chewing like a man who'd forgotten how to be grateful. "I've been thinking about Mom a lot," he said. "How she'd want us to be better." "Better is work," I said. "Are you here to work?" His jaw tightened. "I'm here to make amends." "Amends have a shape," I said. "What shape does yours take?" He set the fork down and laced his fingers together, performing sincerity like a speech he'd practiced in the car. "I know I messed up. I know I sold things I shouldn't have. If there's anything of Mom's left, maybe a small piece. I thought it could help me remember her. Keep her close." He said it softly, the way a person says please when what they really mean is now. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he asked for access. I sipped water and let the quiet grow. When people want something, quiet makes them show you the edges. "I was thinking," he said, filling the space, "if you've still got her bracelet, the one with the little emeralds, I could, keep it safe. Like, part of her with me." "The emeralds went first," I said. "Pawned as a bundle because they weighed enough to clock on the scale." He flinched, just a fraction, the way a man flinches when he realizes the story in your head is more detailed than the one in his. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know." He tried a different road. "I can help around the house. I've got time. I could stay a few days, fix the gutters, oil the doors, take inventory of stuff." "Inventory." I nodded, as if the word meant nothing. "The guest room still has clean sheets." Relief flashed across his face, too quick to hide. "Thanks, Dad." We ate in a fragile piece, careful not to bump into the shards. When dinner was finished, I stood to clear the plates. He reached for them at the same time, his hand brushing the old linen napkin, and he looked up with eyes that tried to say something honest. I know I don't get to ask for anything. But I really do want to make things right. Making things right is not a sentence, I said. It's a list. I washed the dishes while he dried. The rhythm of it felt almost normal, and that was the most dangerous part. Familiarity is a soft coat, it can hide a knife. When we were done, I wiped the counter, turned off the kitchen light, and pointed toward the hallway. Guest room is down there. Fresh towels are in the closet. He nodded. Mind if I make a call? Just to let someone know I'm here. Use the porch, I said. Reception's better. He stepped out into the damp night with his phone, the rain a thin curtain between him and the rest of the world. I waited until the screen glow drifted away from the window, then moved to the study. I opened the cabinet, the latch soft under my fingers, and rested my hand on the safe. Cold, steady. Still with me, I whispered to Margaret, and the house seemed to breathe. I heard the porch door close and the careful tread of Evan's steps returning. I shut the cabinet and walked back toward the living room. He came in with a smile that didn't show teeth. Old number still works? I asked. Yeah, he said. Just letting an old friend know I won't make it back tonight. Anyone I know? Not really. We stood there for a beat too long. He broke it. Do you still have Mom's photos? The ones from Europe? In the study, I said. Top shelf. Mind if I look? I'll look with you tomorrow, I replied. It's late. And I don't like climbing stools at night. A small frustration flashed and was gone. Sure. Tomorrow. He picked up his bag and started down the hall. At the guest room door, he turned. Good night, Dad. Good night. I waited until the door clicked shut before I went to my room. I didn't undress. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the old house settle, to the whisper of rain, to the thin sounds people make when they think they're alone. A faucet, a zipper, a sigh. I lay back, eyes open in the dark, counting heartbeats until his side of the house was quiet. It must have been close to 1 when I rose again. I moved through the hallway the way memory moves, slow, deliberate, without lighting the room. I stopped outside the guest room. The door was closed. The light underneath was a blade. I waited. No footsteps. No creak of mattress. I stepped away and crossed to the study, an old habit pulling me toward the thing I feared I'd lose. The cabinet reflected my shape in the glass, a bent man with more years behind than ahead. I hated that reflection, because it could be broken and still look like me. I put 2 fingers on the cabinet door and gently tried it. Locked, as I'd left it. Good. The key was in my pocket, not in the dish by the front door where it used to live. I turned to leave, and paused. Something small, almost nothing, tickled the edge of my hearing. Not a footfall. Not the rain. A faint, mechanical breath. I followed it to the hallway, to the angle where you could see the guest room door and the living room at the same time. The sound grew clearer, then stopped. I held my breath. It returned for a second, a tiny click, like the throat of a camera trying to swallow light. Another quiet minute. Then the guest room light snapped off. Darkness took the hall again. I stood there until my feet ached. Then I returned to my room and closed the door gently, as if any sudden move might shatter the night and give everything away. I lay down without sleeping. I thought of a list, gutters, doors, inventory. Of the way greed changes its clothes to look like need. Of a promise I'd made to myself on a colder night a long time ago, never again. And as the rain finally thinned to a mist, I decided what tomorrow would look like. I would not accuse. I would not beg. I would not teach him how to steal better by showing him where to stand. Tomorrow, I would let him tell me who he still was. All I had to do was leave the right door almost, but not quite, closed. Ask ChatGPT. Morning came wrapped in the gray light of a sky that hadn't decided whether to rain again or not. The house felt still, too still, the kind of quiet that makes you listen for something you don't want to hear. I found Evan in the kitchen, already at the table, sipping coffee from the mug with the chipped rim. He looked like he'd been up for hours, but not in a way that suggested work had been done, more like a man who'd spent the night pacing. "Morning," he said, his voice just a little too light. "Morning," I replied, setting the kettle on the stove. I took my time, letting the silence stretch. I wanted to see if he'd fill it, and he did. "Didn't realize how much I missed waking up here," he said. "You always made breakfast early." I glanced at him. "You used to sleep through it." He gave a short laugh, looking down at the table. "Yeah. Guess I didn't appreciate it then. I made oatmeal, the way Margaret used to, with cinnamon and just enough brown sugar to take the edge off." I set a bowl in front of him. He thanked me, but I noticed he didn't start eating right away. His eyes wandered to the hallway, toward the study. He thought I didn't notice, but after raising a son like Evan, you learn to read the air. Halfway through breakfast, I decided it was time to lay the first stone in my plan. "You know," I said casually, "I had an appraisal done a while back. On the jewelry." His spoon paused midair. Just for a heartbeat, but it was there, that tiny hitch when a person's mind races faster than their body. "Oh," he asked, trying to sound casual. "Why?" I shrugged. "Insurance purposes. You never know with old houses, break-ins, fires, floods. Figured it was smart to know what it was worth." "Makes sense," he said. But his voice had changed. It was tighter now, his words shorter. "Back when you sold it," I continued, "it wasn't worth much. Well, to you, anyway." I let that hang there, watching his jaw shift. "But the pieces I got back, and the ones I replaced, they've appreciated. A lot." He forced a smile. "How much are we talking?" I leaned back, pretending to think. "Last appraisal came in around $150,000. Maybe more now, given the market." There it was. The mask slipped, just a fraction. His eyes sharpened in a way I'd seen once before, the day he first told me about the urgent bills that turned out to be a weekend at a lake resort. It wasn't joy in his eyes. It was calculation. Wow," he said. "Guess you really took care of it. Margaret's memory deserved no less." He nodded, but I saw his fingers tap twice against the coffee mug, a nervous habit he'd had since he was a teenager and tried to hide a lie. I stood, carrying my bowl to the sink. "The appraiser said some of the pieces are rare now. Collectors would fight for them. But I'm not selling. It's not about the money." "Of course not," he said, quickly. "It's family history." I turned the tap on, letting the sound of running water fill the room. I could feel him behind me, silent now, thinking. Not about history. Not about sentiment. About numbers. When I turned back, his smile was ready again. "You know, Dad, if you ever needed help keeping it safe, I could." "I've kept it safe this long," I interrupted. "I think I can manage." His mouth closed, but his eyes didn't stop moving. Later that morning, I found reasons to linger near the study. Once, I caught him in the hallway outside it, pretending to look at an old family photo on the wall. His gaze wasn't on the photo. It was on the cabinet. "You remember that trip?" I asked suddenly. He jumped slightly, then forced a smile at the picture. "Yeah. Mom hated the hotel. She hated the smell of mildew," I said, stepping closer. "Couldn't sleep all night." Evan nodded, but he didn't ask about the rest of the trip. His mind was elsewhere. By lunch, I was sure. The bait was in the water. Now it was just a matter of waiting to see how far he'd swim for it. That evening, I decided to push just a little more. After dinner, I went into the study while he sat in the living room pretending to scroll through his phone. I left the safe door closed but turned the handle just enough so it didn't click shut. On my way back, I made sure to walk slowly past him, patting my pocket where the safe key wasn't. "Going to make tea," I said. "Want some?" Yeah, sure, he said, too quickly. I disappeared into the kitchen, but I didn't make tea. I stood in the dark by the doorway, just far enough to hear the creak of the couch, the soft pad of footsteps on the rug, the faint pause outside the study door. Then, the almost imperceptible sound of hinges. It lasted maybe a minute. Then the door closed again, footsteps retreating, the couch creaking under his weight. I walked in a moment later with 2 mugs of tea. He took his, smiling like nothing had happened. We talked about nothing for the rest of the evening, the weather, an old neighbor who'd moved away, the football team's losing streak. But beneath it all, I could hear the hum of his thoughts, circling the same thing over and over. By the time I went to bed, I knew one thing for certain: Evan was going to make his move. And I was going to let him. It's strange how the mind works. One small thing, a glance at a half-open safe, the glint in someone's eyes, and suddenly you're not in the present anymore. You're back in a moment you thought you'd buried so deep it would never claw its way to the surface again. I was washing the dinner dishes that night, Evan still in the living room pretending to watch TV, when my hands stopped moving in the soapy water. My mind had pulled me backward. 10 years backward. It was spring then. The year after Margaret died. The house still smelled faintly of her perfume back then, even though I'd washed every sheet and curtain. I'd kept her jewelry in a small cedar box in the top drawer of my dresser, the way she always had. I didn't take it out often, just enough to remind myself that the world we built together had been real. Evan was 24. Aimless. Restless. He had a job, but it was never the kind of job that stuck. He'd work a month or 2, then quit over management issues or bad pay. He came home late most nights, smelling of bars and cheap beer. That week, I remember, he'd been unusually quiet around the house. Avoided me. I thought maybe he was finally taking some time to think about his future. Then, one Friday afternoon, I came home from running errands and saw the dresser drawer open. The cedar box was gone. At first, I thought I had moved it. But I never moved it. My hands shook as I searched the house. Closet. Study. Even the pantry. Nothing. When Evan came through the door later that evening, I knew before I even asked. There was a lightness to him, the kind of false calm that comes when someone's carrying a secret they think they can hide. Evan, I said. Where's your mother's jewelry? He froze for a split second, just long enough to confirm it. Then he sighed, as if I was the one making this difficult. Dad, I needed the money. How much? He wouldn't look at me. 500. I remember the number hitting me like a slap. $500. For a lifetime of memories. For the ring I slipped on her finger when she said yes. For the necklace she wore when we danced under the bridge in Paris. You sold all of it for 500? My voice cracked, but not from anger. From something deeper. He rolled his eyes, actually rolled his eyes, and said, It's just jewelry, Dad. You can buy more. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I just sat down. Because in that moment, I realized the real theft wasn't the gold or the gemstones. It was the complete lack of understanding in his voice. The absolute absence of respect for what those things meant. The next day, I went to the pawn shop. The man behind the counter told me half of it had already been sold. The rest would cost me more than Evan had gotten for all of it. I paid what I could, but I couldn't buy it all back. Not then. That was the start. I began making lists, every piece, every description I could remember. I searched estate sales, called antique dealers, joined collectors' forums. I learned how to identify hallmark stamps, how to tell a true emerald from a clever fake. Some days, I'd drive 3 hours to a dusty shop in another town, chasing a rumor. Sometimes I came back with nothing. Other times, I came back with something close enough to pass for hers, and in my mind, that was good enough. The process took years. And during those years, my relationship with Evan withered. Phone calls went unanswered. Holidays passed with empty chairs. Every so often, he'd send a text asking for money, but never for news, never for me. It was during that time I met Clara Benson, my neighbor 2 houses down. She had an eye for antiques, a network of contacts in the trade. She helped me track pieces, negotiate prices. Sometimes she'd come over just to see the progress. She understood, without me having to explain, that this wasn't about wealth, it was about restoring something sacred. Piece by piece, I rebuilt the collection. Some were the originals I'd found again, others were upgraded replacements. By the 8th year, I had something Margaret would have been proud of. By the 10th, the appraiser told me what I hadn't dared imagine: the collection was now worth about $150,000. But to me, the real value wasn't in the number. It was in the fact that it was back in my hands, safe. Untouchable. Or so I thought. Now, in the present, standing in my kitchen with soap on my hands, I could hear Evan laughing faintly in the living room at something on the TV. And I realized, he didn't even know the full story. He didn't know what I'd done to recover those pieces. He just knew they were worth something now. And if I was right, he was already planning how to make them his again. But this time, I wasn't the man I was 10 years ago. This time, I had a plan of my own. The next morning, I decided it was time to stop wondering and start confirming. Evan was up early again, sitting at the kitchen table with his phone, but I could tell from the unfocused look in his eyes that he wasn't reading anything. He was thinking. Plotting. I poured coffee for both of us, setting his mug down without a word. He gave me a quick thanks but didn't look away from the little screen in his hand. His other hand drummed lightly against the table, the same rhythm he used to tap on the counter as a teenager when he was waiting for me to leave so he could sneak something. I took my coffee into the study. This was where the real game began. I opened the safe, making sure the hinges gave that soft, unmistakable sound. The velvet-lined trays inside caught the light just enough to make the gold and gemstones glimmer, even with the blinds half closed. I rearranged a few cases, humming quietly to myself, a song Margaret used to like. Then I did something deliberate. I left the safe door slightly ajar. Not wide open, just enough that someone walking past might notice, might be curious. The kind of opening that would nag at you until you looked closer. I stepped out of the study and headed for the hallway, moving slowly so the sound of my footsteps carried. Evan was still in the kitchen, but I saw his eyes flick toward the hallway as I passed. "Need a document from the cabinet," I said casually. "You remember the one in the study?" "Yeah," he replied, too casually. I didn't go back right away. Instead, I went into the bathroom, turned on the tap, and waited. It didn't take long. I heard the faint creak of the study floorboard, the one just inside the door. Then the pause. Then the sound of someone holding their breath without realizing it. I could picture him, standing in the doorway, seeing the safe, seeing the glint of the cases inside. A moment later, there was the soft metallic sound of a case being lifted, set down again. Another case. A quick shuffle, as if he was memorizing the layout. Then, nothing. Just silence. I let a full minute pass before stepping back into the hallway. Evan was in the kitchen again when I appeared, stirring his coffee like he'd been there the whole time. But there was a faint flush in his face and a restless gleam in his eyes. "Find your document?" he asked. "Didn't need it after all," I said. "Plans changed." He nodded, and we both pretended nothing had happened. The rest of the day, I kept the conversation light, little things about the town, the weather, Clara's new dog. But I was watching. Every time I mentioned anything even remotely related to the jewelry, Evan's posture shifted. He'd lean in slightly, or his eyes would narrow just enough to show he was listening more closely. That evening, I decided to turn the screw a little tighter. After dinner, I suggested we go through some old family photographs in the study. "Sure," he said, trying to sound casual. I pulled a heavy album from the shelf, flipping through pages filled with yellowed edges and faded colors. Margaret in her garden. Evan as a toddler, gripping her necklace in his tiny fist. Family gatherings where the jewelry caught the light just enough to remind me of the warmth it once carried. "Here," I said, tapping a picture. That's her wearing the sapphire brooch. She loved that piece. Evan studied the picture. Yeah, it's nice. His voice was flat, but his eyes lingered on the brooch. He didn't ask where it was now, which told me he already knew. I closed the album, setting it back on the shelf. She always said these things weren't just ornaments. They were history. Each piece had a moment attached to it. He smiled faintly. History's only good if someone's around to enjoy it. I met his eyes. True. Which is why I make sure it's enjoyed the right way. Something passed between us in that moment, a subtle acknowledgement that we both knew what the other was thinking, but neither was ready to say it out loud. Later that night, I left the safe ajar again. Not by accident this time, but as an invitation. I wanted to see just how far he'd go without being pushed. From my bedroom, I heard the study door open. A pause. The faint scrape of a case being pulled forward. And then, the distinct sound of a phone camera shutter. That was all I needed. By the time I heard the study door close again, my plan was already shifting into its next phase. Evan thought he was getting closer to the prize. What he didn't realize was that the moment he stepped into that study, the trap had already started closing. And now, I just had to let him walk right into it. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of the sound of the rain returning in soft bursts against the windows, but because of that faint, telltale click that had echoed down the hallway hours earlier. It wasn't loud, not like in the movies where everything is exaggerated for effect. This was subtle. The discreet snap of a phone camera, followed by the whisper of someone shifting their weight on creaky floorboards. You only recognize a sound like that if you've lived long enough to notice the things people try to hide. When I walked into the kitchen the next morning, Evan was already there, leaning over the counter with his phone in his hand. His thumb moved quickly on the screen, but he locked it before I could see anything. "Morning," he said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," I replied. I poured coffee, watching him over the rim of my mug. He avoided my gaze, focusing instead on stirring sugar into his cup like the process required delicate precision. He didn't know I'd been standing in the hallway last night, just far enough to hear the study door open, the pause, the click. He didn't know I'd counted 2 photographs, maybe 3. He didn't know that when I heard the sound, I'd smiled to myself, not because I was happy, but because the proof I needed was now almost in my hands. I decided not to mention it. Not yet. Let him believe I was still playing the unassuming old man, too trusting to suspect anything. People are more reckless when they think you're blind. Around mid-morning, I asked if he wanted to help me in the study. "Just sorting some papers and old records," I said casually. He hesitated, just long enough for me to see the calculation in his head, then nodded. "Sure, Dad." We worked side by side for a while, him stacking envelopes, me pretending to rifle through an old ledger. I left the safe door closed this time, the key in my pocket. It wasn't about giving him another opportunity, it was about changing the rhythm so he couldn't predict my next move. At one point, he asked, "Do you ever get nervous having valuable stuff here?" I shrugged. "I've had it this long. Not much to worry about." He gave a small laugh. "Guess so. But you never know. People get desperate." I looked at him then, not harshly, but with the kind of steady gaze that lets a person know you're hearing more than they're saying. "Yes," I said. "You never do know." The rest of the day passed with small talk and small silences, but I noticed something. Evan kept his phone close, almost protective. It never left his pocket unless he was leaning over it, shielding the screen with his hand. That evening, Clara stopped by. She'd brought over a basket of fresh bread from the bakery in town. She greeted Evan warmly. She's always been polite, no matter what she thinks privately, and we all sat in the living room for a while. Clara has sharp eyes. It didn't take her long to notice the way Evan kept glancing toward the study door. She caught my gaze once, a small question in her eyes, and I gave her the tiniest nod. After she left, I went to the study under the pretense of putting away the bread knife. I opened the safe and examined the cases. Nothing missing. But I could see faint smudges on the glass lids, fingerprints that weren't mine. That confirmed it. He'd been opening them, touching the pieces. Not just looking, imagining. Later that night, I waited until the house was still. Then I took a small recording device, the kind Clara's antique dealer friend had once given me as a fun gadget, and hid it on the highest shelf in the study, angled toward the safe. It was small enough to be invisible unless you knew where to look. I tested it once, clapping my hands softly in the room, and played it back. Crisp. Perfect. If Evan wanted to keep circling the safe like a shark, I was going to let him, and this time, every move, every word, would be mine to keep. Just before I went to bed, I paused outside the guest room. Light seeped through the crack under the door. I listened. No movement. No talking. But I could feel it, the tension building between us, quiet but electric. He thought he was working toward something. He thought he was closing in. And I was letting him. The next morning started with the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. It wasn't mine. Evan was already up, humming some tuneless melody as he poured himself a cup. The sound was almost cheerful, too cheerful, the kind of false brightness a person puts on when they're trying to hide the fact they've been somewhere they shouldn't. "Morning, Dad," he said, flashing a quick smile. "Thought I'd make coffee for both of us." I nodded, accepting the mug he slid toward me. I didn't ask what time he'd gotten up. I didn't have to. The faint scuff marks on the rug near the study told me he'd been walking around before the sun was fully up. After breakfast, he offered to help with some yard work. I told him I'd take care of it myself. Truth was, I needed him inside, alone, so I could confirm what I already suspected. Once I heard the back door close behind him, I went straight to the study. The safe was closed, locked just as I'd left it. I opened it slowly, letting my eyes travel over the contents. The rows of velvet cases sat exactly in place, almost. One of the bracelets, a gold chain with small diamond clusters, was not in its usual position. It wasn't missing, but it had been shifted to the front of the case, angled slightly as though someone had picked it up, weighed it in their hands, and put it back in a hurry. And there was something else, a hairline gap between the lid of that case and its base. Evan must have closed it without pressing down all the way. A subtle mistake, but one that told me everything I needed to know. He was testing me. This wasn't theft yet, this was a probe, a quiet way of finding out if I checked the contents regularly. If I noticed something moved. I smiled faintly. Yes, I noticed. I noticed everything. I left the bracelet exactly as it was. I wanted him to believe I hadn't seen it. Let him think the safe was still a quiet invitation, that I was still blind to his curiosity. The longer he thought that, the bolder he'd become. When he came back inside, wiping his hands on a rag, I was at the kitchen table reading the paper. "Get much done?" I asked. "Yeah, trim the hedges," he said. "You should see the front, looks better already." I nodded, turning a page. "Thanks. I'll check it later." He poured himself more coffee, moving around the kitchen like he belonged there, but his eyes kept flicking toward the hallway. He was waiting for a reaction that never came. By mid-afternoon, Clara stopped by again, bringing over some preserves she'd made. She sat with us for a while, chatting about nothing in particular, but I could feel her eyes moving between us, reading the tension. At one point, she mentioned a jewelry exhibit at the town museum. Evan perked up instantly. "What kind of jewelry?" he asked. "Old estate pieces," she said, watching him closely. "Some worth quite a bit." He nodded slowly, then glanced at me. "You should put some of Mom's stuff in an exhibit like that. People would appreciate it." "Maybe someday," I said, sipping my tea. He smiled faintly, but there was something in his eyes, something sharp and assessing. He wasn't suggesting it because he thought strangers would appreciate the jewelry. He was testing my willingness to part with it, even temporarily. That night, I checked the recording device in the study. Nothing new, just the sound of me opening the safe earlier, then closing it again. No nighttime visits. which meant Evan was getting cautious, spacing out his moves so he wouldn't seem too interested. But the bracelet told me all I needed to know. I went to bed with a decision made: I wouldn't push him. I wouldn't confront him over something so small. No, I'd give him more rope. Enough to tie his own knot. In the dark, I thought of Margaret. I could almost hear her voice saying what she used to tell her students when they were about to make a choice they'd regret: you're free to do as you like. You're not free from the consequences. Evan had already taken the first step. And when the time came, I'd make sure the consequences were waiting for him, heavy and undeniable. It was late morning when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone. Clara usually called before stopping by, and the mailman had already come and gone. Through the front window, I saw a silver sedan I didn't recognize. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped Evan, followed by a woman I'd never seen before. She was in her early 30s, tall, with a sharp, deliberate style. Every detail about her was curated: her cream-colored coat, the way her hair framed her face, even the gold hoops in her ears that caught the light. Evan waved casually when he saw me in the window, as if this visit was nothing unusual. I stepped onto the porch before they reached the door. "Dad," he said, smiling like a salesman about to make a pitch, "this is Miriam." She extended her hand, her nails perfectly done in a shade that matched her lipstick. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Mr. Hale. Evans told me so much about you." I shook her hand, noting her grip, firm, but not warm. This was someone who chose every gesture carefully. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Weather's turning." Inside, Miriam immediately took in the space with her eyes, not in a casual, appreciative way, but in the way someone scans a room for points of interest. I saw her gaze pause on the glass cabinet in the hallway. She smiled faintly before turning back to me. "You have such a beautiful home," she said. "So many unique pieces." "Most of them are just old," I replied. We sat in the living room. Evan positioned himself on the couch next to Miriam, his arm resting casually along the backrest, but I could tell from the way his foot tapped that he was impatient. Miriam crossed her legs, leaning forward slightly. "Evan's been telling me about some of your family heirlooms," she said, her tone light, almost conversational. "I'd love to hear more about them." I raised an eyebrow. "Heirlooms?" She glanced at Evan. "You said your mother had some incredible jewelry." Evan laughed, as if embarrassed. "Yeah, I might have mentioned it. Mom had great taste." I nodded slowly. "She did." Miriam tilted her head, her earrings swaying slightly. "I work in design, so I'm always interested in vintage pieces. They have such character. You can't find that in modern stuff." "That's true," I said. "But their value isn't just in how they look." Her smile widened. "Exactly. Value can be sentimental, or otherwise." Evan jumped in quickly. "I told her you take good care of Mom's things. Always keeping them safe." I leaned back, studying them both. Safe is one word for it. We chatted for a while about nothing: local shops, a new restaurant in town, the weather. But Miriam kept steering the conversation back toward the idea of preserving valuables, of keeping important items somewhere secure. She never outright asked to see anything, but the questions circled closer and closer, like a hawk tracing spirals over a field. After an hour, I stood and offered coffee. While I was in the kitchen, I left the doorway open just enough to watch their reflection in the glass of the cabinet. Evan leaned toward her, speaking in low tones. She glanced toward the hallway twice, her eyes narrowing slightly in thought. When I returned with the coffee, she smiled warmly, as if nothing had passed between them. "Thank you, Mr. Hale." "You can call me Richard," I said, setting the cups down. We sipped in silence for a moment. Then Miriam placed her cup gently on the table. "If you ever wanted to have those pieces appraised again, I know a few people. Private collectors. Discreet. They can give you a real number, not just an insurance estimate." "That's kind of you," I said evenly. But I already know the number. Something flickered in her eyes, a quick calculation, before the smile returned. Of course. Just thought I'd offer. Evan glanced at her, then at me. You know, Dad, Miriam has a good point. Sometimes it's worth knowing the market value, just in case. I know the market value, I said. And I know exactly where the market ends and the memories begin. Miriam's smile didn't falter, but I saw the way her fingers tightened slightly on the arm of the couch. When they left later that afternoon, Evan shook my hand. We'll catch up more tonight, yeah? Sure, I said. Drive safe. I watched their car pull away, the silver sedan disappearing down the road. My gut told me two things. Miriam wasn't just curious, she was a participant. And whatever this plan of theirs was, it was starting to take shape. Back inside, I checked the safe. Everything was where it should be. But the faintest trace of perfume, the same scent Miriam wore, lingered in the study air. That told me she'd been closer to the jewelry than she should have been. I closed the safe, locked it, and sat in the chair by the window. The trap was nearly ready, but now I knew, I wasn't just dealing with my son. I was dealing with both of them. And that meant the final move would have to be even cleaner. That night, the house had the sort of stillness that knows it's being watched. Not silence, stillness. The difference is important. Silence is empty. Stillness is waiting. I turned out my bedroom light at a believable hour and let the house think I was asleep. I lay on my side, eyes open, counting the beats between the radiator's sighs. Somewhere past midnight, the rain faded to nothing and the air sharpened. The old clock in the hall ticked like a metronome for my patience. At 12:41, I heard it, the soft whisper of a door easing open. Not mine. The guest room. I didn't move. Sheets up to my chin, breathing slow and even, I became part of the furniture. Footsteps padded into the hallway, and then a second set joined, lighter, careful. Miriam. They thought they were clever, speaking in the hushed confidence of people who think the night protects them. But the house and I had made an agreement long before they arrived. It tells me what it hears. I listen. Light? Evan breathed. No, Miriam said, a thread of a whisper. Phones on minimum. Stay close. The study door complained the way old wood does when it's asked to lie. It knows the truth and hates being part of a fraud. A brief cone of phone light swung across the hall and cut away, and I pictured them both in the doorway, heads tilted to gauge the distances, cabinet, safe, window. How long from latch to velvet? How many seconds before a hinge tells on them? On the top shelf of the bookcase, hidden behind a row of Burl travel guides, the recorder waited like a patient witness. It didn't need light. It only needed sound. A pause, then Miriam's voice again, whisper firm. You said it was the lower drawer. It is, Evan said. Last night the door was left, not locked all the way. You sure he's asleep? He's old, Miriam. And old people wake up, she said. Don't underestimate him. I almost smiled into my pillow. She was perceptive, even if she had chosen the wrong partner. A key clinked softly, metal kissing metal, then a muttered curse. Not my key, they didn't have that. Evan was testing the handle, probably hoping the habit of my carelessness had followed me into old age. Tonight, it hadn't. Plan B, Miriam whispered. We don't need to take everything. Photos. Layout. We sell the shots, set up a private buyer. Once we have the number, we come back with a story. What story? Family emergency. You need to liquidate. You persuade him to let it out just long enough for an appraisal. We handle the rest. Silence stretched. The recorder drank the quiet. The cabinet's outer latch gave a small, reluctant click. Evan must have found the angle I sometimes use to ease it open without rattling the glass. I could hear trays shifting, velvet gliding against wood, the faintest chime as a chain kissed the setting. Don't touch with your fingers, Miriam warned. Edges only. The oils will leave marks. How do you know that? I've done things, she said. Hold the phone steady. The first camera snap landed exactly where I'd expected it to. Then another. Then a third, faster, like a heartbeat accelerating. I pictured Evan's shoulders loosening as greed replaced caution. That's when people get sloppy, when the prize starts talking to them in their own voice. Get the brooch, Miriam said. The sapphire. Good. Angled. Now the clasp. Buyers always want the back. Why the back? Authenticity lives in the parts people don't display. Another click, then a soft intake of breath from Evan. God, this is a lot of money sitting on a shelf. No, she corrected. This is a lot of stories sitting on a shelf. We're selling the story as much as the stones. A drawer eased open. The hinges sighed. My mind ran the inventory without looking, left to right, bracelets, rings, brooches, then the necklaces layered like the memory of a dance. A tiny scrape, one case sliding, stopping short. I knew which case that was. He had touched it yesterday and left the lid ajar by a hair. I had left it as he placed it, a breadcrumb for the night to find again. Careful, Miriam said, sharper. If he notices a gap. He didn't, Evan said, too confident. He's been acting like he hasn't seen anything. That is not proof, she whispered. It's bait. Silence, then a nervous laugh from Evan. You think he's playing me? I think you think no one would ever do to you what you've done to people, she said. That's how you get caught. The recorder hummed on, impartial. They moved methodically now, bracelet, ring, brooch, necklace, each with 2 or 3 quiet snaps. Miriam narrated like a teacher taking attendance, hallmarks, weight estimates, condition descriptions that made me realize she had, indeed, done things. The kind of details private buyers like, mill-grain edging, closed-back settings, old cut stones. Window, she said at last. Check it. What for? Exit, she replied, annoyed. If something goes wrong. The old sash window scraped upward an inch and stuck hard, the swollen wood refusing any sudden plan. It has always been stubborn in damp weather. I had counted on that, too. Evan gave it a testing push, and the frame protested just loud enough to make them both freeze. We waited together, the 3 of us, me in the dark, them in a cone of weak light, the recorder with its lidless ear, counting the same 10 seconds. Okay, Miriam exhaled. We don't need the window. We're not taking anything tonight. Then when? Evan whispered. Tomorrow, she said. Afternoon. We come back with a car and a believable reason. You cry if you have to. Cry? You want 100 grand in 48 hours, she said. Learn to cry. A beat passed. Then Evan, softer, he's still my dad. And he was your dad when you sold your mother's jewelry for beer money, Miriam said, the kindness stripped from her voice. Don't pick tonight to grow a conscience. The words landed like a small stone in a still pond. The ripples reached me, cold and old. It was almost a gift to hear someone else say it in my house. Fine, Evan sighed. What's the pitch? You say a debt collector is circling. You need to consolidate, avoid garnishment. You ask to borrow the pieces, just for a day, for professional photographs and evaluation. You sign a note promising return in 24 hours. He's sentimental. He'll want it in writing. Give him the paper. And if he says no? Miriam didn't miss a beat. Then we do it the hard way. A silence thick enough to chew. How hard? Evan asked, and in that question I heard the boy he had been, the one who stole from his mother's dresser and convinced himself he was owed every bright thing in the world. Not violent, she said quickly. I'm not going to prison for this. But there are ways. A locksmith friend. A fire alarm. A medical scare. You distract him. I move the cases. You think you can just. I think, she said, you brought me here because you don't want to know how it happens. He didn't answer. The recorder caught the smallest sound instead, the sound of his throat working around shame or excitement. It's hard to tell the difference in the dark. They took a few more photos, slower now, filling whatever checklist she had in her head. Then a zipper whispered, her bag swallowing the night, and the study door eased back to its frame. "Go," Miriam breathed. Same steps. No talking in the hall. Their footsteps retreated down the corridor, soft as regret. The guest room door clicked. A minute later, water ran briefly in the bathroom, a sound effect for innocence. Then the house resumed its waiting. I stayed where I was until my legs tingled with pins and needles, then slid out of bed and moved like a shadow. In the study, I didn't touch the safe. I reached up to the top shelf, eased aside the travel guides, and took the recorder down with both hands. A tiny green dot blinked twice. Working. Back in my room, I plugged in my old headphones. The foam is splitting, and one ear is weaker than the other, but they do their job. I pressed play and listened to the night tell me what I already knew. The words stacked like bricks. Not just curiosity. Not just temptation. A plan. A timetable. Methods. That's the difference between a mistake and a choice, the time you spend preparing to do it. At the end, I stopped the recording and sat very still. In the black square of the window, my reflection looked older than it had last week. There's a particular fatigue that comes from loving someone who keeps trying to turn your home into a crime scene. I set the recorder on the nightstand and rested my hand on it. It felt like a key. Not to a door, but to an ending. Tomorrow, they would come back with smiles and paperwork and curated sympathy. They would offer me a script where my lines were trust and my stage direction was surrender. And I would let the scene start, because there are moments a man needs to watch the play to its final act to make sense of the years that came before. But I also knew this, when the curtain dropped, they would not be the only ones with a reveal. I turned off the headphones and lay back on the bed, the recorder warm against my palm. In the hall, the clock kept excellent time. In the guest room, two people rehearsed lies they thought would be new to me. I closed my eyes and pictured Margaret's sapphire brooch catching museum light, not lamplight, glimmering in a glass case we paid for with caution and love. People would stand in front of it and read her name. That was tomorrow's truth. Tonight's truth was quieter. I had everything I needed. The house settled again, as if relieved to be believed. I slept for the first time in days, not because I was safe, but because the next move was finally, completely mine. Ask ChatGPT. Morning light spilled through the curtains in long, thin bands. I was already at the kitchen table, the recorder sitting in plain view beside my coffee mug, when Evan shuffled in. His hair was tousled, his eyes heavy, but not from sleep. Guilt wears a different kind of tiredness. "Morning," he said, forcing a stretch. "You're up early." "I've been up for a while," I replied, my voice even. "Couldn't sleep." He poured himself coffee, avoiding my eyes. His phone sat on the counter, face down. I could feel the weight of the recording in the room, even though he didn't know it existed yet. We didn't say much over breakfast. Miriam stayed in the guest room longer than necessary, eventually emerging in a neatly pressed blouse and a smile that was too bright for the hour. "Morning, Mr. Hale," she said warmly. "Sleep well?" "Well enough," I answered. They sat together, whispering occasionally, throwing me the kind of sideways glances you give when you're building courage for something. I let them stew in their own readiness, sipping coffee until the silence became unbearable for them. Evan finally cleared his throat. "Dad, there's something I wanted to talk to you about." I set my mug down. "Go ahead." He launched into it like he was reading lines off a script. "Look, I've been dealing with some financial trouble. Debt collectors are circling, and I'm trying to figure out a way to keep things from getting ugly." Miriam chimed in, her tone full of concern. Evan didn't want to say anything, but we think there might be a way to temporarily ease the pressure. I leaned back in my chair, studying them. "Go on." Evan took a breath, glancing at her before continuing. "I was thinking, maybe I could borrow Mom's jewelry. Just for a day or two. I know a private appraiser, they could photograph it, give me a valuation, and I'd bring it straight back. You could even hold a signed note from me, if that makes you feel better. He delivered it with the confidence of someone who believes the trap he's setting is invisible. I let the silence stretch until I could see a flicker of uncertainty in his expression. And why, I asked slowly, would I do that? Because, Miriam said smoothly, you trust your son. And this could be a way to help without actually spending anything. I looked at her, my eyes steady. Trust isn't a blank check, Miriam. It's a balance you keep topped up. Once it's empty, the account's closed. Evan's jaw tightened. Dad, it's just a loan. I'm not going to sell it. You'd have it back before you even missed it. Interesting choice of words, I said. Before I missed it. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I reached for the recorder, pressing the play button before either of them could react. The room filled with the sound of their own whispers from the night before. Every detail, the plan, the photos, Miriam's instructions about crying, even her remark about not growing a conscience, spilled into the air like oil spreading across water. Evan's face drained of color. Miriam sat very still, her smile collapsing into a thin line. When the recording ended, I set it back on the table. That's what it means, I said. Evan's voice was barely a whisper. You were listening? No, I said. I was recording. Because I learned a long time ago that people who've already stolen from you once tend to think they can do it again. And I like to have proof. Miriam opened her mouth, but I cut her off with a raised hand. Don't bother. I'm not interested in explanations you rehearsed together. Evan leaned forward, his hands clasped like he was holding onto the edge of a cliff. Dad, I wasn't. You were, I said firmly. And you would have done it again if you thought you could get away with it. The only difference this time is I was ready. He sat back, his eyes flicking toward Miriam, but she was staring at the floor now. You know, I continued, when you sold your mother's jewelry for $500, I thought the worst part was losing the pieces. I was wrong. The worst part was realizing you'd convinced yourself it was no big deal. That you were entitled to it. That it was just stuff. Evan's voice cracked. I needed the money back then. And I needed my wife back, I said quietly. But life doesn't work like that, does it? For a long moment, none of us spoke. The clock ticked in the hallway. Outside, a crow called once, sharp and solitary. Finally, I stood. You'll be leaving today. Both of you. I'll give you 20 minutes to pack your things. Evan looked stunned. Dad. No, I said, my tone final. You don't get to sell me out twice. Not under my roof. I turned and walked toward the study, locking the safe with deliberate care. Every click of the mechanism sounded like the sealing of a door that would never open for him again. By the time I returned to the kitchen, their voices were low and tense in the guest room. I didn't need to hear the words. I'd already heard everything that mattered. When they finally came down the hall with their bags, Evan paused in the doorway, as if waiting for me to say something, to offer a lifeline, or at least a softer goodbye. I didn't. He stepped out onto the porch, Miriam following close behind. The sedan's engine started, and a moment later, the sound of tires on gravel faded into the distance. The house felt quieter without them. Not empty, peaceful. I poured myself another coffee and sat at the table, the recorder still beside me. I didn't need to play it again. The memory was enough. Tomorrow, I'd make the call that would end this for good. And Evan would never see his mother's jewelry again, not in my house, and not in anyone's. The morning after they left, the house was so still it felt like it was holding its breath. I'd gotten used to the subtle tension of having them here, the footsteps in the hall at odd hours, the soft click of a phone camera shutter, the careful phrasing of every conversation. Now, without it, the quiet was almost strange. I sat in the study with a cup of tea, the safe open in front of me. The velvet-lined cases gleamed under the soft morning light. The sapphire brooch. The gold chain with the diamond clusters. the emerald ring that Margaret wore every Christmas. All of them exactly where they should be. This would be the last time I saw them here. I picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a warm, professional voice answered. Weston Museum Foundation, this is Paula. Morning, Paula. It's Richard Hale, I said. Oh, Mr. Hale. I was expecting your call. Are we still on for this afternoon? We are, I replied. I'll be bringing the collection in myself. Perfect. The display is ready. Margaret's name will be the first thing people see. I hung up and sat back, letting the satisfaction settle in. Evan had never known, not once in all his scheming, that the real jewelry hadn't truly been mine for years. 6 years ago, when I was halfway through restoring the collection, I'd gone to the Weston Museum with an idea. I wanted Margaret's pieces displayed as a permanent exhibit, not locked in a house where temptation could walk in with a familiar face. The museum director loved the idea. We worked out a deal. I would donate the entire collection, on the condition that it would be kept under her name and never sold, loaned, or removed. The papers were signed, notarized, and filed. From that moment on, I'd been the legal custodian, allowed to keep them at home only until the display was ready. Over the years, I'd quietly replaced each real piece in the safe with an identical replica from a jeweler friend in the city. Perfect copies, right down to the weight, the hallmark stamps, the tiny scratches in the metal. Evan and Miriam had been photographing fakes. By mid-afternoon, I'd packed the cases into a reinforced museum crate. Clara arrived right on time to help me load it into her SUV. She'd been part of the plan from the very beginning, the one who first suggested a public display so Margaret's story would outlast both of us. You're really doing it today? She asked, tightening the straps around the crate. Today, I confirmed. Before anyone gets another idea. At the museum, Paula met us at the service entrance. She guided us through the back hallways to the prepared glass cases. Each had a small brass plaque engraved with Margaret Hale Collection. I stood for a long moment before handing the crate over, watching as the staff began placing the pieces inside. They'll be safe here, Paula assured me. Climate controlled, security 24/7. And the public will get to enjoy them. That's all I ever wanted, I said. That evening, back at home, the phone rang. The caller ID flashed Evan's name. I let it ring twice before answering. Dad, he began, his voice a mix of forced calm and curiosity. Listen. I know things ended a little tense the other day. But I've been thinking about what we talked about, and maybe we could work something out. Just for a short time, like I said before. No, I interrupted. A pause. What do you mean, no? I mean it's impossible, I said. The jewelry isn't here anymore. It hasn't been yours for a long time. In fact, it hasn't even been mine. He laughed, confused. What are you talking about? 6 years ago, I donated the entire collection to the Weston Museum, I explained. It's on permanent display now. Your mother's name is on the plaque. It's protected by legal contracts you can't touch. The pieces you saw here were replicas. Silence. Then, sharper, you're lying. You can drive down there and see for yourself, I said. They're already in the case. People are looking at them right now. His voice cracked with anger. You tricked me. No, I said. I protected your mother's memory. You just never bothered to ask who I was protecting it from. There was a long, shaking exhale on the other end of the line. You think this makes you the good guy? I don't care how you see me, I replied. But I know how Margaret would see me. That's enough. I hung up before he could say another word. The house felt different after that, lighter. I walked into the study, looked at the empty safe, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to check it twice before bed. The jewelry was gone from my home, but it was safe. Untouchable. And Evan would have to live with the fact that the only thing he could have taken from me now was something I'd never give him again, my trust. It was 2 days after I hung up on Evan when the sound of tires crunching over my driveway broke the calm. I'd been in the kitchen, slicing an apple, the late afternoon light spilling across the counter in warm gold. That light always reminded me of Margaret, how it used to catch the side of her face when she read by the window. I set the knife down and looked out. The silver sedan. For a second, I thought maybe they'd just pass by. But no, the engine cut off. Doors opened. Footsteps crunched on the gravel. I didn't move to greet them this time. I stayed where I was, leaning lightly against the counter, and waited for the knock. It came. 3 sharp raps, faster than the ones Evan had used the night he first showed up. Less rehearsed, more urgent. I opened the door to find both of them standing there. Evan looked drawn, almost hollowed out, as if the last 48 hours had been heavier than he'd expected. Miriam, on the other hand, still carried that sharp composure, but it had cracks now, thin and hairline, around the edges of her smile. "Dad," Evan began, "we need to talk." I stepped aside. "Then talk." They came in. Miriam's eyes darted toward the study almost immediately, like her instincts didn't care about whatever new plan they'd come up with. I caught it. I always catch it. Evan stayed in the middle of the living room, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Look, I overreacted on the phone. We both did. But we were thinking, maybe there's still a way for us to work this out. For the jewelry to stay in the family." I didn't sit. "It's not in the family, Evan. It's in a museum. It's not coming back here." Miriam stepped in smoothly. "Richard, you have to understand, Evan just wants to make sure his mother's legacy isn't locked away somewhere strangers can touch it." "Strangers can't touch it," I said. "It's under glass, in a climate-controlled room, guarded day and night. And unlike here, no one in that building is trying to figure out how to steal it." Her smile froze for half a second before she smoothed it over. "That's a little unfair." "It's a lot fair," I cut in. Evan's jaw tightened. "You're really not going to budge on this?" "No." The word landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. He shook his head, almost laughing under his breath. "So that's it? You'd rather let some museum have it than your own son?" I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. "I'd rather let the world have it than give it to someone who once sold it for $500 and came back 10 years later to try again." His mouth opened like he was going to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. "You didn't come here to remember your mother, Evan. You came here for the same reason you went to that pawnshop a decade ago. And Miriam," I turned my eyes to her, "you came here because you saw a chance to help him make it happen." She didn't deny it. That was the thing, she didn't even try. Evan took a step forward, frustration tightening his voice. "You've already made your point. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry." "That's not an apology," I said. "That's an exit line." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Finally, I walked to the front door and opened it. The late sun poured in, spilling over the threshold. "It's time to go." Evan stared at me like he was trying to decide whether to push back or just walk out. Miriam's hand brushed his arm, a small, silent suggestion. They stepped outside. Evan paused on the porch, his hand on the railing, his voice lower now. "You know, Dad, one day you're going to regret shutting me out like this." I looked at him, steady and unflinching. "No, Evan. I regretted letting you back in." His eyes flickered, just for a second, before he turned and walked to the car. Miriam followed, not looking back. I stood at the door and watched them leave, the silver sedan shrinking along the road until it disappeared entirely. Inside, the house felt different, not just quiet, but safe. The kind of safe you don't second-guess. I closed the door, turned the deadbolt, and let the solid sound of it sink in. The safe in the study was empty now, but that didn't matter. The real treasures were already where they belonged, protected under glass, with Margaret's name shining on the plaque. And as for Evan, well, he'd already made his choice. Twice. I went back to the kitchen, sliced the rest of the apple, and ate it standing by the window. Outside, the light was fading, the air cooling, the sky turning that deep, calm blue that comes just before night settles in. For the first time in years, I knew there would be no knocks on the door I didn't want to answer. And I intended to keep it that way.